Have you ever stopped to think about how you think? I mean, really think about it? We move through our lives guided by these mental frameworks, sets of rules and assumptions that shape pretty much everything we do. But we almost never stop to actually look at the frameworks themselves.
It's a huge question, right? But the answer, a lot of the time, lies in these forces we can't really see. The way you understand the world, your place in it, what you think is important and what's not, that stuff doesn't just pop out of nowhere.
Just think about it for a second. Governments, massive corporations, the news media, all these huge systems have a real interest in organizing the world in a way that makes sense to them. So they create a kind of blueprint, a pre-packaged way for us to see everything.
And that's the real question, isn't it? If all these big, powerful systems have a map for you, what map are you using for yourself? Okay, let's really dive into this. First off, let's look at how a state sees the world. There's this amazing writer, James C. Scott, who came up with a powerful idea he called legibility. Basically, for a state to govern or tax or control a really complex reality, it first has to simplify it into a map that it can actually read. This slide just illustrates the whole problem perfectly. On the left, you've got a natural forest. It's chaotic, it's messy, but it's incredibly functional. It's totally illegible to the state. But on the right, you have the scientific forest, all one type of tree, all planted in nice, neat rows. It's perfectly legible, right? Super easy to calculate how much lumber you're going to get. But here's the catch. That legible forest is an ecological train wreck just waiting to happen. It's weak, it's prone to disease, it's basically dead. The act of simplifying it completely destroyed its strength.
And this leads to a super predictable pattern of failure that Scott calls authoritarian high modernism. It goes like this. You see something complex you don't get. You blame it for being irrational. Then you cook up your own simple, rational vision for it, use force to make it happen, and then you just watch it all fall apart. And this isn't just about forests, It's about how we've designed cities, how we've tried to engineer societies, and so much more.
So that's how the state tries to map the world. But what about another really powerful system, the mass media? Well, according to Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman's propaganda model, the news you get passes through a whole series of filters that shape it long before it ever gets to you. So the first filter is pretty simple: ownership. The media outlets you see and hear every day are massive corporations. They're owned by very, very wealthy people. At the end of the day, they are for-profit businesses, and that basic fact shapes what does and does not get to be called news.
The second filter? Advertising. And this is a big one. The real customers aren't you, the person watching or reading. The real customers are the advertisers. Media companies are all competing for those ad dollars, so the news itself has to be packaged in a way that puts people in a good buying mood for whatever the advertiser is selling.
Okay, filter number 3 is sourcing. News organizations need a constant, reliable stream of information. So where do they get it? Well, they get it from the press briefings at the White House, from the Pentagon, from corporate headquarters. These powerful institutions basically subsidize the news. And by doing that, they get to have their version of the story told first and loudest. And what happens if the media decides to step out of line? Well, that brings us to filter number 4, flack. We're talking organized, negative feedback, lawsuits, advertiser boycotts, huge pressure campaigns. Powerful groups can generate a ton of flack, and that makes it really, really expensive for a news organization to cover certain kinds of stories.
And the final filter is all about a shared ideology. The authors originally called it anti-communism, but you can think of it as any kind of big, dominant belief that creates a simple good guys versus bad guys story. It's a way to shrink the spectrum of what's considered acceptable debate and push any other views to the fringe. So, here's the crucial thing to understand. These 5 filters, they all work together, silently, in the background. It doesn't take some secret conspiracy. It's just the natural result of how our economic and political systems are set up, and they basically set the boundaries of what we even think and talk about, a lot of times without us even realizing it's happening.
And this brings us right back to that core question. We've seen how states and the media create these simplified, easy-to-read maps of the world for us. But what about the map we're making for ourselves? Are we just kind of accepting their blueprint, or are we actively drawing our own?
This is where the idea of taking conscious control really comes into play. And believe it or not, there are tools designed for exactly this, like the self-authoring program. It's basically a guided process for, writing the story of your own life.
It's broken down into 3 parts. First, you analyze your past to figure out how you got to where you are right now. Then, you analyze your present to really understand your strengths and your weaknesses.
And then, most importantly, you articulate a detailed, vivid vision for your future. You define exactly what you want, and you make a real plan to get there.
But does this kind of thing actually work? I mean, is it just glorified journaling? Well, let's look at the data. In one university study, they had a control group of students, and their dropout rate was 27% by the second semester. That's a pretty standard number, but it's also pretty high.
But now look at this. For the students who went through just a short version of the Future Authoring program, the dropout rate was only 14%. That is almost a 50% reduction. It's just this incredibly powerful example of what happens when you create a clear, personal blueprint. When you actually know where you're going, you're a hell of a lot less likely to get knocked off course.
So, writing your own story, that's step one. The next step is to actively start collecting the mental tools and frameworks you're going to need for the journey. It's all about building a personal toolkit for thinking better.
And one really powerful tool is this mindset of radical accountability, which Naval Ravikant captures perfectly here. By taking ownership of everything, even stuff that is totally outside of your control, you hang on to your sense of agency. You stop being a victim of your circumstances, and you stay the author of your response.
And another key idea comes from the blog Farnham Street. The point is, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can stand on the shoulders of giants by learning the great mental models, these timeless ideas from science and philosophy and business that help you avoid common mistakes and just make better decisions.
So, we've got these external maps, we have our own personal map, and we've got a toolkit of mental models. But what does all of this come down to in the day-to-day grind? Well, this brings us to a really famous speech by the writer David Foster Wallace. It's called This Is Water. Wallace argues that real freedom, the kind that actually matters, isn't about getting whatever you want. It's about exercising conscious control over your own awareness. It's that moment-to-moment choice of what you're going to pay attention to, how you're going to interpret a frustrating situation, and where you're going to find meaning. It's the discipline to see the world differently from your own default setting. And really, that's the ultimate takeaway. The systems around us are always going to try to hand us a map. But the real work, the most important education you'll ever get, is learning how to consciously choose. Choosing what to think about, what to value, and moment by moment, what to see. So the question is, what will you choose to pay attention to?